You need to leave, now.
What? I'm just having a coffee.
The manager says you're making people uncomfortable. You're trespassing on private property.
I bought this coffee 10 minutes ago. I'm not bothering anyone.
Are you leaving or do I need to remove you myself?
You're making a mistake.
FBI Special Agent.
I don't care if you're the president.
Officer Craig Bartlett.
You can't do this. I know my rights. These were the words, captured with startling clarity by the ambient audio recording systems of a San Diego coffee shop, that marked the final, desperate protest of a man whose world was collapsing in real time. The man was Rick Gallagher, a 48-year-old off-duty police officer, and his protest was not against a criminal, but against the irreversible consequences of his own prejudice. This single, heated moment on the afternoon of November 5, 2023, was the predictable climax of a confrontation he alone had initiated. The official report, designated case number 91C-27, would later refer to the incident as a textbook example of confirmation bias leading to a catastrophic professional failure. The evidence, compiled from 3 separate high-definition CCTV camera angles and the subsequent body cam footage from responding officers, was irrefutable. It documented how Gallagher, acting on no credible threat or legal justification, chose to intimidate and harass another patron. That patron was Elias Vance, a 35-year-old senior field officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. The ensuing 23 minutes would result in Rick Gallagher's summary dismissal from the police force, the complete forfeiture of his 22-year career, and a civil liability settlement that would cost him and his union a staggering $200,000. For Elias Vance, it was merely an inconvenient interruption while he finalized an unclassified security briefing over a cup of coffee. The entire event serves as a clinical, documented case study in how a single decision rooted in deep-seated bias can lead to absolute and quantifiable ruin. But an hour before that cry of impotent rage, the scene inside Bayfront Roasters was one of mundane tranquility. Elias Vance had entered the establishment at approximately 13:45 Pacific Standard Time. His movements were economical and precise, the quiet hallmark of a man trained in situational awareness and professional discretion. He wore a charcoal gray suit, impeccably tailored but deliberately understated, designed to blend in rather than stand out. He carried a slim, hardened briefcase containing a government-issued encrypted laptop. He did not order a complicated frothy beverage, but a simple black Americano, paying with a credit card that bore only his name, no hint of his affiliation. He chose a small table in a corner, one that afforded him a clear view of the entrance and exit while keeping his back to a solid wall, a subconscious habit ingrained through years of fieldwork in environments far less forgiving than a Californian coffee shop. With practiced efficiency, he set up his workspace. The laptop was opened, its screen angled away from public view. A discreet flesh-toned earpiece was fitted into his right ear, its thin wire nearly invisible against his skin. To any casual observer, he was just another one of the city's countless professionals, a consultant or lawyer catching up on work between meetings. He was, in every measurable sense, unremarkable, a man meticulously blending into the urban landscape. His focus was absolute as he began his work, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a quiet, steady rhythm, his expression neutral as he participated in a low-volume conference call concerning logistical support for an upcoming diplomatic mission. The air in Bayfront Roasters was thick with the rich, earthy scent of freshly ground espresso beans and the sweeter note of steamed milk. The ambient sound was a gentle symphony of urban life. The rhythmic hiss and clank of the barista's portafilter, the low hum of the refrigeration units, the muffled cadence of a dozen quiet conversations, and the distant wail of a city siren. Sunlight streamed through the large front window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. It was a perfectly average afternoon. Seated 2 tables away from Elias Vance was Rick Gallagher. He had been there for nearly 20 minutes before Vance arrived, nursing a lukewarm coffee in a ceramic mug, scrolling idly through his phone. Gallagher was a man defined by his profession, even when not in uniform. He carried himself with a certain rigidity, a sense of coiled tension beneath a veneer of civilian casualness. His service record, which would later be scrutinized by internal affairs investigators, painted a troubling picture. A 22-year veteran with a history of commendations for bravery, but also 3 separate civilian complaints for improper conduct and 2 for racial profiling. In each of those prior instances, a lack of conclusive evidence had allowed him to escape formal discipline. The complaints were noted, filed away, and ultimately dismissed, reinforcing in Gallagher's mind that his instincts were impeachable and his authority absolute, on or off the clock. From his vantage point, Gallagher's attention began to drift from his phone to the man in the charcoal suit. His professional life had conditioned him to see the world through a lens of suspicion, to constantly scan for anomalies, for people who seemed out of place. But on this day, that professional lens was clouded by a profound and unexamined personal bias. He did not see a professional conducting business. He saw a black man in a suit that to his mind seemed too expensive, sitting alone with a high-end laptop, speaking quietly into an earpiece. Each of Elias Vance's innocuous actions was filtered through Gallagher's prejudiced worldview and reinterpreted as evidence of wrongdoing. The discreet earpiece was not for a business call, but for coordinating a crime. The focused typing was not work, but a hacking attempt on the cafe's public Wi-Fi. Vance's periodic, calm scan of the room, a trained security habit, was misinterpreted as casing the establishment for a future robbery. For 17 minutes, Gallagher watched, his initial curiosity curdling into suspicion and his suspicion solidifying into a self-righteous certainty. He had found his anomaly. He had identified a threat where none existed. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the conviction that he and only he recognized the danger that everyone else was casually ignoring. He was an officer of the law, and he was about to intervene. The decision was made. He drained the last of his cold coffee, placed the mug on the table with a definitive click, and pushed his chair back. His path was direct, his shoulders squared, his entire posture broadcasting an authority he was not on duty to wield. He approached Elias Vance's table, his shadow falling across the laptop screen, a dark harbinger of the impending collision. The words he was about to speak, laced with a calm and unearned sense of power, would trigger a documented chain reaction of personal and financial devastation from which he would never recover. Elias Vance did not immediately look up. He finished typing his sentence, his fingers never breaking their steady, measured cadence. Only then did he slowly lift his head, his expression a carefully constructed mask of neutral inquiry. His gaze met Rick Gallagher's, and in that moment the fundamental dynamic of the encounter was established. One man was operating from a position of emotional, prejudiced impulse, the other from a place of disciplined, analytical calm. Vance's eyes, clear and unblinking, betrayed no hint of fear or intimidation, only a quiet curiosity. On what grounds exactly? The question was delivered in a low, even tone, devoid of accusation or challenge. It was a simple request for information, a procedural inquiry that implicitly demanded a logical, fact-based response. For Gallagher, this was not the reaction he had anticipated. He expected alarm, stammering, perhaps a defensive anger, all of which would have served to confirm his manufactured suspicions. Vance's placid composure was, in itself, an act of defiance. It subtly undermined the authority Gallagher was attempting to project. The officer's response was a retreat from logic into pure assertion. On the grounds that I am telling you to, you are acting suspicious. It is better if you just go. The statement was a circle of flawed reasoning, an argument that fed on itself. The justification for the order was the order itself. The accusation of suspicious behavior was offered without a single piece of supporting evidence. The narration of events playing out in Gallagher's mind was starkly different from the reality captured by the cafe's multiple camera angles. He saw Vance's calm as arrogance, his well-tailored suit as a costume, his professional focus as a criminal's elaborate cover. To protect the public, he had to act. Vance, in turn, recognized the futility of arguing against an opponent who had already declared himself the victor. Instead, he shifted tactics, introducing external, objective standards into the confrontation. He slowly and deliberately closed the lid of his encrypted laptop, the soft click echoing in the tense silence between them. He folded his hands on the table, a gesture of non-aggression. I am a paying customer, and I have not violated any policy of this establishment. If you have a problem, I suggest you get the manager. If you believe a law has been broken, I suggest you call the police. Each sentence was a carefully laid brick in a wall of reason. He was invoking the rules of commerce, the authority of the establishment's management, and the official procedures of law enforcement. He was offering Gallagher two legitimate avenues to resolve his supposed concerns, knowing full well that neither would support the officer's baseless claims. This rational approach was the ultimate miscalculation, as it failed to account for the depth of Gallagher's irrational conviction. For the off-duty officer, this calm, logical dismantling of his authority was the final insult. He reached into his back pocket, his movements sharp and angry, and produced a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open, flashing the silver shield pinned inside. I am the police, and I am giving you a lawful order to vacate. The words hung in the air, a flagrant abuse of power documented with crystalline clarity. He was no longer a concerned citizen. He was an agent of the state, weaponizing his position to enforce a personal prejudice. He had just crossed a line, unaware that every second of his transgression was being permanently recorded. The sight of the badge had no visible effect on Elias Lance. His training had prepared him for confrontations with armed insurgents in failed states and hostile intelligence agents in foreign capitals. An agitated off-duty officer in a San Diego coffee shop did not register as a significant threat. He processed the information not with emotion, but with cold, strategic clarity. The man before him had just committed a serious professional error, escalating a personal bias into an official act of intimidation. Vance's continued composure served only to pour fuel on Gallagher's fire. The officer's worldview was predicated on a clear hierarchy of power, one in which his badge commanded immediate deference and compliance, especially from someone who looked like Elias Vance. This quiet, immovable resistance was an intolerable challenge to that worldview. His face, already tight with suspicion, began to flush with a deep, blotchy red of pure anger. Why will you not just listen? I know your type. You come in here with your fancy suit and your little earpiece, thinking you own the place, casing the joint. I have seen it 100 times. The accusations grew more specific, more unhinged, a verbal torrent of stereotypes pulled directly from the recesses of his prejudice. The narrative was now fully formed in his mind. He was the lone hero who had spotted a sophisticated criminal element that everyone else had missed. The documentary evidence, however, told a different story. The CCTV footage, when later analyzed, showed that not a single other patron had registered Vance's presence as threatening. The barista continued to steam milk. A young couple in the corner laughed at something on their phone. The only source of disturbance in the entire establishment was Rick Gallagher himself. His voice, initially a low and intimidating growl, had risen in volume, drawing the first curious glances from other tables. The ambient hum of the coffee shop began to falter as a few conversations trailed off. The bubble of tension Gallagher had created was expanding, threatening to engulf the entire room. Vance simply let him talk, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged. He understood that every word Gallagher spoke was another nail in the man's professional coffin. He was no longer just harassing a citizen. He was creating a public disturbance, a fact that would be duly noted in Sergeant Rossi's forthcoming incident report. Finally, having exhausted his stream of baseless accusations against a wall of unshakable calm, Gallagher reached for his ultimate tool of coercion. "That is it. I am calling for backup." He pulled out his personal cell phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "We are going to have you arrested for trespassing and disorderly conduct." It was a fatal, irreversible misstep. He was about to use official city resources to enforce a personal vendetta, an act that would trigger an immediate and unforgiving internal investigation. He was so blinded by his own self-righteousness that he failed to see the trap closing around him. Before he could make the call, Elias Vance raised one hand, palm forward, a universal gesture to stop. His voice cut through Gallagher's rage with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Officer, before you make a call that will permanently end your career, you need to understand exactly who you are speaking to." The profound authority in Elias Vance's voice, combined with the official credentials lying open on the table, should have been a full stop. It was a clear, unambiguous signal to de-escalate, to retreat, to reconsider. For a brief, fleeting moment, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed Rick Gallagher's face, captured in high definition by the cafe's security system. The man's unwavering calm, the expensive suit, the sheer implausibility of the situation, it almost broke through. But a lifetime of ingrained bias is a formidable fortress. The cognitive dissonance was simply too powerful for Gallagher to overcome. His mind, conditioned to see the world through a specific and flawed lens, rejected the new information. It could not reconcile the image of a black man he had prejudged as a threat with the reality of a senior federal intelligence officer. His brain, in an act of self-preservation, defaulted to the only explanation that kept his prejudiced worldview intact. It was a lie, an elaborate bluff. The momentary doubt was instantly replaced by a fresh wave of righteous fury. He felt insulted, as if Vance were playing him for a fool. A short, sharp, humorous laugh escaped his lips. "You really think I am going to fall for that? A cheap fake ID from some online store? You just made this a whole lot worse for yourself." He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Vance, his voice rising. "That is a federal offense. Impersonating a federal officer is a felony. You are not just trespassing anymore. You are committing a serious crime right in front of me." In his mind, he was no longer just removing a suspicious person. He was apprehending a dangerous criminal who dared to challenge the authority of the law. Every syllable of his accusation was being recorded. The camera-designated CCTV-2, mounted discreetly above the espresso bar, provided an unobstructed view of the table, its lens an impartial, unblinking witness. The sensitive ambient microphones, designed to capture quiet conversations for security purposes, were now documenting a career-ending monologue with forensic clarity. The digital timestamp in the corner of the footage read 14:37:12, marking the precise moment Gallagher sealed his own fate. Utterly oblivious that he was the architect of his own ruin, he held up his personal cell phone with a sense of theatrical finality. "Okay, Mr. Secret Agent, let's see what some real on-duty officers think about your little credentials." His thumb jabbed angrily at the screen, navigating to the phone's keypad and dialing the 3 digits that would make his mistake irreversible. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was faintly audible. "San Diego 911, what is your emergency?" Gallagher's response was a torrent of self-assured conviction. "This is off-duty Officer Rick Gallagher, badge number 734. I require immediate backup at Bayfront Roasters on Harbor Drive. I have a hostile individual refusing to leave who is now actively impersonating a federal agent. Yes, impersonating. Send a unit immediately. He is a black male, mid-30s, wearing a suit. He is not armed, but he is non-compliant and highly confrontational." Each descriptor was a gross distortion, a permanent record of his bias now being logged into an official dispatch system. He ended the communication with a triumphant smirk, placing his phone down on the table like a gavel. They are on their way. The call was completed. The police were on their way. The words hung in the air, a stark and unexpected variable introduced into Rick Gallagher's simple equation of power. For a fraction of a second, his forward momentum, the entire engine of his self-righteous anger, stalled. The statement was not a plea, nor was it a threat. It was a clinical diagnosis of a fatal error about to be made. But the diagnostic came from a source his prejudice had already deemed unreliable, and so it was dismissed. A short, derisive snort escaped Gallagher's lips. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand you are about to obstruct justice." He raised his phone, his thumb poised over the call button, a petty king about to pass sentence. It was then that Elias Vance began to move. His actions were not hurried or reactive, but flowed with a deliberate, unhurried grace that was in itself a form of power. His right hand left the table and went to the inside of his charcoal gray suit jacket. The movement was economical, precise, drawing Gallagher's eyes against his will. There was a faint rustle of expensive fabric. Then Vance's hand re-emerged, holding a simple, black leather wallet. It was not the kind that held cash or credit cards, but was clearly designed for a single purpose: identification. Vance did not flash it as Gallagher had done. He placed it on the polished surface of the table with a soft, definitive sound, and then, using his index finger, flipped it open. The object lay there between them, an island of irrefutable fact in a sea of baseless suspicion. The interior was stark. On one side, behind a clear plastic window, was a photograph of Elias Vance, his expression neutral, set against a sterile blue background. On the other, pressed into the leather, was a heavy, gold-colored metal seal, intricately detailed with the image of an eagle, its talons clutching a compass rose. The words encircling the seal were unmistakable, even upside down: Central Intelligence Agency, United States of America. Beneath the photograph, the text was printed in a severe, no-nonsense font: Elias M. Vance, Senior Field Officer, Federal Commission 774A. The credentials did not scream for attention. They commanded it with an absolute silent finality. "My name," Vance stated, his voice remaining at the same low, conversational volume, "is Special Agent Elias Vance. The suspicious activity you have been observing for the past 20 minutes was me finalizing an unclassified security briefing for a diplomatic protection detail. Your continued interference in the duties of a federal officer has been noted, recorded, and will be reported through official channels. Officer Gallagher, your career is over. You just haven't realized it yet." The transformation of Rick Gallagher's face was a dramatic, multi-act play captured in forensic detail by the cafe's overhead camera. The initial look of smug triumph dissolved first, melting away as his brain struggled to process the visual information from the credentials. It was replaced by a brief, slack-jawed vacancy, a wide-eyed stare of pure, uncomprehending shock. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, mottled gray. For a moment, the entire edifice of his certainty crumbled. But a lifetime of unexamined bias is a powerful anesthetic. His mind, unable to reconcile the reality on the table with the narrative he had constructed, chose the narrative. The shock curdled into a new, more desperate form of rage: denial. It was his last and only defense. He let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that was closer to a bark. A fake. "You really think I'm going to fall for a cheap fake ID from some novelty website?" He pointed a trembling finger at Vance, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and fury. "That is it. That is a felony. Impersonating a federal officer is a felony." He snatched his phone from the table, his movements now clumsy and erratic. He was no longer acting. He was reacting, a cornered animal lashing out. With shaking hands, he stabbed at the screen, his desperate need to be right overriding every last vestige of professional judgment. The call connected almost instantly. "This is off-duty Officer Rick Gallagher, badge 734. He practically shouted into the phone, his voice echoing slightly in the now silent coffee shop. "I need units at Bayfront Roasters immediately. I have a suspect impersonating a CIA agent. He is hostile and refusing to cooperate. Send backup now." He ended the call, slamming the phone down on the table. The plastic clattered against the wood, a sound of final, irrevocable commitment. He glared at Vance, his chest heaving, a wild, triumphant look in his eyes. "They are on their way. Let's see what they think of your little costume." He had made the call. He had summoned the law to validate his prejudice, entirely unaware that he had just officially requested a formal, documented witness to his own professional suicide. The identity reveal is the turning point. What is the greatest instant justice reversal you have ever seen? Share it in the comments. And if you want to see the full, devastating consequences of Gallagher's call, make sure you are subscribed and hit that like button. The silence that followed Rick Gallagher's 911 call was heavy and suffocating, a stark contrast to the mundane hum of the coffee shop just minutes earlier. The digital timestamp on the main security camera advanced with an almost deliberate slowness, each second a grain of sand falling in the hourglass of Gallagher's career. He stood with his arms crossed, a posture of smug, self-appointed authority, his eyes fixed on Elias Vance, who had not moved a muscle. Vance remained a picture of serene composure, his hands resting on his closed laptop, his gaze betraying nothing. He was no longer a participant in the confrontation. He was now an observer, waiting for the final act of a play that Gallagher had written, directed, and starred in. Exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds later, the glass door of Bayfront Roasters chimed. 2 uniformed San Diego police officers entered, their presence immediately commanding the attention of the entire room. The lead officer was Sergeant Maria Rossi, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for being meticulous and fair. Behind her was Officer David Park, younger but with a calm, watchful demeanor. The body cam on Sergeant Rossi's chest, designated Unit 7B cam, activated the moment she exited her vehicle, its lens capturing a wide, stable image of the scene. The footage would later serve as the primary exhibit in the internal affairs investigation. Gallagher, seeing his cavalry arrive, immediately strode toward them, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "Sergeant, thank God you are here," he said, his voice loud and performative. "This individual," he gestured dramatically toward Vance, "has been causing a disturbance, refused my lawful order to leave, and is now impersonating a federal agent. I want him arrested for trespassing and for a felony violation of U.S. Code Title 18. He was reciting the statutes he believed validated his actions, entirely unaware of how those same statutes were about to be used against him. Sergeant Rossi's gaze swept the room, her eyes taking in every detail with practiced efficiency. She registered Gallagher's agitated state, his flushed face, and his accusatory pointing finger. Then she looked past him to the man in the charcoal suit. She saw no hostility, no sign of a disturbance. She saw a man sitting calmly at his table, watching the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. The discrepancy between Gallagher's frantic report and the visual evidence was immediate and jarring. Ignoring Gallagher's continued tirade, Rossi walked directly to Vance's table, Officer Park flanking her a few steps behind. Her movement was a deliberate and public circumvention of Gallagher, a subtle but clear signal that she was taking control of the scene, not validating his. "Sir, may we see your identification, please?" Her tone was neutral, professional, and respectful. It was the standard opening of any official inquiry. Yet in this context, it was a profound blow to Gallagher's ego. Vance simply nodded, picked up the leather wallet that still lay open on the table, and handed it to her. Rossi took it, her eyes scanning the credentials. The weight of the gold seal, the official federal font, the unmistakable authority. It was all immediately apparent. She held it for a moment, her expression unreadable, before passing it to Officer Park, who had already unclipped the radio from his shoulder. He read the commission number into the receiver, his voice low and even. "Dispatch, run a check, federal officer verification." The seconds that followed were electric. The only sound was the faint crackle of the police radio. Gallagher stood frozen, a triumphant sneer still plastered on his face, absolutely certain of his vindication. He did not see the slight widening of Officer Park's eyes as the dispatcher's voice came back, clear and precise through the earpiece, a voice that was also being recorded by Rossi's body cam. The confirmation arrived in less than 30 seconds, a digital verdict delivered from a distant, impartial database. The response from dispatch was not just a simple confirmation, it was an alert, an automated flag in the system indicating the high-level clearance of the individual in question. The dispatcher's voice, captured with perfect clarity on the body cam audio, was devoid of emotion but carried an implicit warning. Be advised, confirming identity of Elias M.
Vance, Senior Field Officer, Central Intelligence Agency. Federal Commission 774A. Subject has active diplomatic status. No outstanding warrants or advisories. Full interagency cooperation is mandated. The message was unequivocal. They were not dealing with a suspect. They were dealing with a protected federal asset. Officer Park gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Sergeant Rossi. The public validation was complete. The humiliation was about to begin. Rossi turned back to Vance, her entire demeanor shifting from professional neutrality to profound official deference. She handed back the credentials with a steady hand. "Agent Vance, on behalf of the San Diego Police Department, I sincerely apologize for this disturbance. We were responding to a call. Is there anything you require from us or any assistance we can provide?" Her apology, delivered publicly, was the first official blow. The second came as she pivoted on her heel to face a now pale and slack-jawed Rick Gallagher. The warmth and respect in her voice vanished, replaced by a tone of pure, unadulterated ice. "Officer Rick Gallagher," she began, her voice cutting through the silent coffee shop. "You are to stand down. You are hereby informed that you are being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs investigation. You have, while off duty, abused your authority, interfered with a federal officer in the performance of his duties, and filed a false report." Her words were a formal indictment, delivered in front of the very audience Gallagher had sought to impress. "Officer Park," she commanded, without looking away from Gallagher's horrified face, "escort him outside." Gallagher's mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for air, the words of protest he had planned dying in his throat. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him with the force of a physical impact. The patrons who had been watching with detached curiosity now stared with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was no longer an officer of the law. He was a liability, a disgrace being publicly stripped of his power. He felt Officer Park's hand on his elbow, a firm but non-violent grip guiding him toward the door. His career, his pension, his entire identity, it was all evaporating under the fluorescent lights of a coffee shop, all of it recorded for a review board to watch over and over again. He took one last look at Elias Vance, who had already reopened his laptop, as if the entire catastrophic event had been nothing more than a minor, forgettable distraction. The aftermath for Rick Gallagher was not a slow, creeping decay. It was a clinical, systematic dismantling of a life, documented with the same cold precision as the CCTV footage that had initiated it. The Internal Affairs Investigation, case file IAD 2023-5104, was less an inquiry and more a formal autopsy of a dead career. With 3 camera angles, pristine body cam footage and a recorded 911 call filled with demonstrably false statements, there was no need for witness interviews or lengthy deliberations. The evidence was absolute, a digital monument to one man's prejudice. The review board convened, watched the 23-minute timeline of events, and reached a unanimous decision in under an hour. On December 1, 2023, less than a month after the incident, a termination letter was delivered to Gallagher's home via courier. It cited in stark, unforgiving legal language gross misconduct, dereliction of duty, abuse of authority under the color of law, and a direct violation of the department's ethics code, specifically the clause pertaining to impartiality and bias-free policing. The loss of his annual salary, a comfortable $92,500, was the first and most immediate financial blow, but it was merely the opening salvo in his financial ruin. The second, more devastating strike came from a civil rights lawsuit filed on behalf of Elias Vance. The suit, which named both Gallagher and the city of San Diego as defendants, alleged racial discrimination, defamation, and unlawful detention. The city's legal counsel, upon reviewing the mountain of irrefutable video evidence, advised that taking the case to trial would be an act of fiscal suicide, guaranteeing a public relations catastrophe and a jury award that could easily reach 7 figures. The police union, equally unwilling to defend the indefensible, pressured Gallagher to accept a settlement. The final figure, sealed in an out-of-court agreement, was a staggering $200,000. The union's liability insurance covered $125,000 of that amount, a payout that would lead to increased premiums for every other officer in the precinct. The remaining $75,000, however, was designated as a punitive penalty to be paid by Gallagher himself. A court order was immediately filed to garnish this amount directly from his accrued pension fund, meaning the very retirement he had spent 22 years building was now being used to pay for the single afternoon he chose to destroy it. The financial bleeding did not stop there. The state of California's Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, known as POST, upon receiving the official report from the San Diego Police Department, initiated its own review. Their decision was swift and final: a permanent revocation of Gallagher's peace officer certification. This administrative act effectively barred him for life from ever serving as a law enforcement officer, a security guard, or in any capacity that required a state-issued license to carry a firearm in any jurisdiction within the United States. He was not just fired, he was professionally exiled. The fallout radiated into every corner of his life. Attempts to find work in the private sector were met with closed doors. A simple background check by potential employers revealed the high-profile civil rights lawsuit and the circumstances of his dismissal. His name had become synonymous with the incident, a permanent digital ghost haunting his every application. He was a liability, uninsurable, and unemployable. Former colleagues who had once shared a patrol car with him now crossed the street to avoid him, their silence a clear verdict of ostracism. He was a cautionary tale, a pariah in the very community he had once sworn to protect. In stark contrast, the life of Elias Vance continued its trajectory, utterly unperturbed. He was, as his credentials stated, a senior officer in a federal agency, a man whose daily concerns involved matters of national security, not the petty prejudices of a disgraced beat cop. The $200,000 settlement, a sum that had crippled Gallagher, was quietly and entirely donated by Vance to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, an act that transformed the financial consequence of one man's bias into a resource for fighting the injustices of others. The final, silent shot of the Bayfront Roaster security footage serves as the perfect epilogue. It shows Elias Vance, after the commotion has subsided and the police have departed, reopening his laptop. He takes a single, placid sip of his now cold coffee and resumes his work. For him, the event was a minor 23-minute delay.
for Rick Gallagher, it was the precise duration of his entire life's implosion. Was the cost of his prejudice, quantified to the last dollar and the last shred of his reputation, a lesson learned? The evidence suggests that for men like Gallagher, the price is never understood, only paid.